Number 8. JoANNE Mccader. In early 2020, Florida woman JoANNE Mccader, aged 59, was arrested and charged with battery on a person 65 or older following an incident that took place at her rented mobile home in Austin. Mccader's 65-year-old landlady, whose name wasn't released, had arrived at the property one evening to check on some broken items. She made her way inside the trailer after repeatedly knocking on the front door and receiving no reply. It was then that Mccader threw a bucket of human excrement into the homeowner's face. Police were called to the address and arrived to find the woman completely covered in feces, as shown by body cam footage. Mccader herself had been left covered in human waste after she and the landlady had gotten into a physical altercation. The renter took responsibility for the incident, but claimed it had been an accident. In a written statement, Mccader said she'd intended to throw a pail of water at her landlady, but reached for the wrong bucket. She was released on her own recognizance after being charged. Number 7. Manuel Velasquez. In January of 2019, a real estate broker was gunned down in Salt Lake City, Utah, while he was trying to evict tenants from a property he owned in Sugar House. The 40-year-old's body was later found wrapped in a sheet and blanket in a crawl space of the apartment after he'd been reported missing by his wife. Charged in connection to his killing were tenants Manuel Velasquez, Jessica Reese, and their friend Diana Hernandez. The authorities had started looking for Velasquez and Reese when they couldn't find them at the address. A Salt Lake City SWAT team located them and Hernandez at another apartment, where they took them into custody after a brief standoff. Velasquez was booked on suspicion of murder, obstruction of justice, possession of a firearm by a restricted person, and a felony-level discharge of a firearm offense. His female accomplices, who were said to have attempted to clean up the crime scene at the apartment, were booked on allegations of obstruction of justice. They'd reportedly used a skateboard to move Stokoe's body into the crawl space after he'd been shot 4 times by 31-year-old Velasquez. The trio maintained that the real estate broker had initiated the altercation by kicking down the door and then putting Velasquez in a headlock, allegedly prompting the man to shoot him in self-defense. The victim's family disagreed with the suspect's version of events, claiming that Stokoe wasn't a violent person and that he'd merely informed them they needed to clear out the property. Additionally, Velasquez had a criminal history. He was charged with attempted murder in 2010, but the case was dismissed before it could go to trial because the state's witnesses had disappeared. Number 6. Jonathan Lindell Kirk. Rapper Jonathan Lindell Kirk, professionally known as The Baby, was sued in 2021 by Los Angeles homeowner Gary Pagar for close to $118,000. 29-year-old Kirk and a small group of his associates had rented out Pagar's house for a private vacation. However, as stated by Pagar in the lawsuit, they violated the rental agreement terms by having approximately 40 people at the home, including YouTuber Jake Paul. Kirk was accused to have used the property to allow a full commercial film crew to record a music video. Moreover, when 64-year-old Pagar confronted him, he was beat, punched, spat on, threatened, shoved, and robbed by the rapper and members of his entourage. A clip of the altercation would show Pagar being pushed to the ground in his driveway and punched by one of Kirk's associates as the rapper and Paul watched on from a nearby car. In the suit, Pagar also stated that Kirk then followed him inside the house, took his phone, and threatened to stop him from calling the police. The rapper and his team fled the premises once the authorities were eventually alerted. Pictures from the home showed dozens of firearms on the premises, including a multitude of AK-47 assault rifles. As per Pagar's claims, the incident had left the house with a broken foyer sculpture, stolen kitchenware, a massive amount of trash, and damages to the upholstery and floor. Number 5. Randall J Hennessy. On September the 14th of 2021, a man from Biddeford, Maine, was gunned down while trying to evict a tenant. 31-year-old Douglas Michaud and his girlfriend, Jamie Wakefield, lived in a 3-story apartment building owned by the former, and the room below them had been rented out to Randall J Hennessy, aged 30. He and Michaud had had trouble in the past, and the landlord was in the process of kicking Hennessy out. Wakefield would later report to the authorities that she'd been having a confrontational talk with Hennessy outside the building. When Michaud approached him and told the tenant to leave her alone, He walked back inside while the couple went to the front porch. Hennessy then emerged armed with a handgun and shot Michaud multiple times in the chest before going back inside. As Wakefield was tending to him, Hennessy returned and shot his landlord once more in the head at point-blank range. He fled the scene on a dirt bike and rode along train tracks from Biddeford to New Hampshire. The authorities talked with him over the phone and he agreed to surrender at a location in Durham. Hennessy's case is ongoing and in December of 2021 he pleaded not guilty to murder and gun charges. Number 4. Ellen Wink. A Connecticut public official was charged with murder in January of 2022 after she had shot a tenant dead inside the Norwalk residence that she owned. At the time, Ellen Wink, aged 61, was the city's deputy Republican registrar of voters, and she'd served as city clerk from 2009 to 2011. She and her tenant, 54-year-old Kirk Lemetta, had been in a long-running dispute over rent payment. Wink had previously been arrested for illegally locking Lemetta out of the house, and she was also reported to have disposed of his belongings in the city dump. On January the 20th, Wink went to the home and fatally shot Lemetta 5 times with a revolver. She then left the premises and called 911, telling dispatch that the man had come at her because she'd been cleaning up the abode. Court documents indicated, however, that Wink then admitted to responding officers that she'd shot Lemetta, adding, "He's been my tenant and driving me nuts." The woman's bail was initially set at $1 million, but later upgraded to $2.5 million in February of 2022, following the emergence of cell phone footage which seemingly disproved the public official's claims of self-defense. Lemetta had recorded his encounter with Wink on his cell phone. The two had had a conversation and at no point did the tenant appear to make a move towards the woman. 3 minutes into the clip, she turned around and began shooting at Lemetta, seemingly following him as he attempted to flee. She then picked up the phone and threw it outside, which prosecutors argued was her preventing him from immediately calling for help. Number 3. Donald Wayne Toomer Jr. 45-year-old Kyla Oliver was found in critical condition at her home in Grand Bay, Alabama, after she'd been viciously attacked by a former tenant in April of 2016. The woman had to be placed in a medically induced coma for treatment at the University of South Alabama Trauma Center after suffering multiple lacerations to her face. Donald Wayne Toomer Jr. was identified as a suspect and arrested at his residence roughly an hour after the attack. Toomer had rented a room from Oliver roughly 4 years prior and admitted to have punched the victim 7 or 8 times. But the police suspected that an axe retrieved from the scene had also been used in the attack. Toomer didn't state a clear reason for the attack, but did mention being aggravated by unspecified rumors Oliver had allegedly spread about him. He was initially charged with burglary and assault, but at the recommendation of the Mobile County District Attorney, the charges were later upgraded to attempted murder. Number 2. Rampa Sword. Rampa Sword was charged with murder and arson in September of 2019 after he'd started the fire that killed his former landlady. 49-year-old Sword was reportedly angry that the woman, identified as 63-year-old Bibi Jasmine by the New York Post, had kicked him out of their shared Queens Village home. Jasmine was reportedly helping the man who'd arrived in New York City a few months prior from Guyana. He'd initially claimed that he didn't have a place to stay while visiting the city, but the visit turned into an indefinite stay. Sword reportedly didn't pay rent or bills and eventually started threatening Jasmine with violence before she eventually kicked him out in late August. He sought vengeance, and as the woman slept, Sword doused her bedroom in flammable liquid and then set it ablaze. At the time, Jasmine was wheelchair-bound after having recently suffered a stroke. She was unable to escape the first-floor home on her own and was later found dead in her bed. Sword admitted to setting the fatal fire upon being arrested by the NYPD, and surveillance footage had captured him pacing outside the building on 219th Street near Hillside Avenue prior to the incident. Number 1. Dimitri Mikhailov. In 2011, Virginia woman Lisa Sales agreed to rent out her basement for $2,000 per month to Russian immigrant Dimitri Mikhailov, who was attending graduate school at George Washington University School of Business. They got along at first, with reports claiming that Sales was treating Mikhailov like a younger brother. The woman nevertheless found her tenant suspicious. His life was far from that of a regular student, as he drove a luxury Mercedes and would always buy multiple rounds of alcohol for people when they went out. Their relationship was irreparably fractured on September the 16th, when Mikhailov returned home after a night of heavy drinking and attacked Sales. He slammed her dog against the dresser before throwing the woman to the ground and attempting to abuse her. The assault allegedly lasted for several hours, with the intoxicated Mikhailov continuously pushing down his landlady and groping her. He attempted to strangle her in the bathroom, but she broke free and managed to barricade herself with furniture in her bedroom. The attack left Sales with injuries to her cervical spine, and Mikhailov was subsequently charged with battery, to which he eventually pleaded guilty. He spent less than a month in jail, and days after his arrest, Sales went through his belongings. She found a flash drive that contained an investment report listing total assets of over $16 million and a letter to Mikhailov written by his father, Valery, from Lefatovo, a Russian prison where the country's most high-profile criminals are detained. As she pieced her tenant's life together, Sales found that his father had at one point been one of the CIA's most valuable assets. He'd reportedly agreed to spy for the agency in 2001 and spent 6 years collecting information on the Kremlin and President Vladimir Putin before he was eventually arrested by Russian authorities. The woman contacted the FBI and expressed her suspicion that Mikhailov had fiduciary responsibility for his imprisoned father, but didn't receive an answer back. Eventually, in a civil suit against Mikhailov, Sales was awarded $300,000 in damages for assault and battery and for infliction of emotional distress. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get slapped by Will Smith or live with Jada for a month? Let us know in the comments section below.